everybody. Welcome back to Coding Nomads Tech Talks. I'm Ryan Desmond, co-founder of Coding Nomads, and I'm back again today with Mike Driscoll. Some of you may remember him from a previous video. Just as a bit of context, Mike is a highly experienced Python engineer with over 14 years of experience with Python. He's also a content creator for various websites, including his own blog for programming-related content, and an author. He's written several books, including Python 101 and Jupyter Notebook 101, among others, and I'll link to those down in the description in the video. But thank you, Mike, for joining us again. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it as well.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again. So what are we going to chat about today?
Today, I thought I'd talk about the Jupyter Notebook and just kind of give you an overview of how it works and how to use it.
Nice. So to just kick things off, what is Jupyter Notebook?
So Jupyter Notebook is a web-based tool that runs locally on your own machine, although it can be deployed on a server so you can access it remotely. Most people use it locally, though.
Okay.
It allows you to program. You can write in Python. You can write in multiple other languages through plugins. The best thing that I've heard of people using it for is that they will use it with Markdown, which is a markup language you can use to kind of format your text and kind of create a report, a document that is easy to reproduce on other people's machines. So if you're like a researcher, you might like create a document, and then you have all your code there that someone else can run and see the same results that you got on your own machine. And so it makes sharing your research and duplicating your research easier. Nice. I think that's probably one of the best features I've seen it used for. Personally, I like to use Jupyter Notebook for presenting Python. So it lets me live code in kind of a presentation format. Right. And it makes it really easy to share how to do something in Python that way.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people doing that. So what about in the, I know it's used a lot by kind of Python developers in general, including a lot of data scientists and kind of potentially, into the machine learning realm. What makes Jupyter Notebook different than your traditional IDE, for instance, let's say VS Code or PyCharm?
Well, for one thing, it's kind of stripped down, whereas PyCharm and VS Code have all kinds of autocomplete and remote features. Jupyter Notebook is kind of like idle, editor that comes with Python. It can do autocomplete and syntax highlighting. But other than that, it doesn't really do a whole lot with your code. You're not going to be able to debug your code very well in Jupyter Notebook. And you can't really test your code in Jupyter Notebook. But that's not really what it's for. It's for kind of a playground where you go to learn how to do something. And if you want to run some code to graph something, you'll run it, and then it'll display the graph right below your code.
Right.
So you can kind of see it visually how your code is going to work.
Okay.
I think that's probably its biggest benefit.
Well, I'm looking forward to taking a tour, especially with the author of Jupyter Notebook 101. So I'll let you take it away. Why don't we go ahead and jump in? You can share your screen and we can cut our video.
Okay. All right. So let's get this started. So the first thing to know about Jupyter Notebook is it doesn't come with the Python programming language. We will go ahead and install it. It doesn't take very long, and I think it's worth looking at how to do this. I can remember how to do it. So first thing I'm going to do is just going to create a folder to virtual environment to put our code into. And then I'll activate it.
Is there a little typo there? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now we should have pip ready, so we can pip install Jupyter.
And I think I'll just jump in here real quick. I think most people who are watching this will already understand this, but those first few commands that you ran there, you created a virtual environment, which basically just allows you to configure, install various things, configure the environment, but it doesn't affect your actual machine that you're working on because it's a virtual environment just for this, for instance, this folder, and he called it Jupy, and then CD'd into Jupy and then activated that virtual environment. And now we're installing, you said pip install, what was it? Pip install?
Jupyter.
Jupyter. And that installs,
Jupy. Yep.
right, that installs Jupyter Notebook in this virtual environment in this directory Jupy.
Yes. So you don't end up installing all of these other, so Jupyter Notebook requires a lot of dependencies. And if you don't want all those dependencies in your system Python, you should use a virtual Python environment instead. So
Perfect.
That's what I'm doing. All right, so we have it installed. I'm going to go ahead and install Rise, which is useful for doing presentations. And I kind of wanted to show that off just a little bit so you can see how cool it is.
Nice.
All right, so now we're ready to actually run Jupyter. And to run Jupyter, you use the Jupyter command followed by notebook, and that will launch the Jupyter notebook server. So when you hit enter, it's going to print out some stuff. Let's go back here. So sometimes when it loads up in your default browser, it'll ask you for a password, and the password or token is actually in your terminal.
Got
So
it.
if I were to like copy and paste this into a different browser, it would say you need your token. And if you're like, what the heck is this token thing about? Just go to your terminal and you can grab the information you need to get in there. You can actually password protect them too. Okay, so this is Jupyter server. We don't have a notebook yet. Create a notebook, you go over here to new, and you can choose Python 3 here. That's the only language I have currently installed for my notebook. You can install, I think there's over 50 different kernels, is how they describe them. So you can install Julia, Ruby. I've even seen they support C++ now. So you could install all kinds of different languages and run them within the Jupyter environment. So let's choose Python 3. Okay, so it loads it up. This Jupyter Notebook doesn't have a title. You can give it one. Let's call it Hello Jupyter here. And all I did to do that was I just clicked on the name, and it lets me rename it there. It'll actually save this off as Hello Jupyter. Note the space. It puts a space in there. So if you have weird issues on your computer with spaces, you might want to not put a space in the name of your.
Yeah, I typically recommend for people to avoid, when it comes to file names and stuff, avoid spaces.
Yeah, well, you don't expect it to put a space in there just when you're giving it a title, but that's what it does.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. All right, so it creates a cell for us. This here is the cell. This part that's highlighted in green. The first cell, all the cells default to code. You can change it to Markdown, NB convert, or heading. I don't know why heading is even in here anymore, because if you click on it, it tells you that it's no longer used.
Right.
You just use Markdown. So that one's kind of a misnomer. It actually goes back to Markdown for you when you click on heading. NB convert, I've never used this one, but it's for if you're converting your notebook to another format, like a PDF or a web page, you can use this to tell Jupyter Notebook how to format it better. So it gives the formatting a little bit different. So most of the time, you'll probably focus on code in Markdown though. So let's take code and say, I don't know, we'll just do something silly. So for I in range 5. Notice that it will automatically indent for you, which is kind of nice. So let's see type whatever Python code I have available to it, and then you can hit Shift Enter to run, or you can just click the Run button, and that'll run the selected cell. And when you run it, it outputs whatever output gets printed out. So you can play around and just learn what's going on with Python. So if you do the dir command, you can find out what attributes and methods there are for a string here. I wish it. Go ahead.
Dir gives you the methods for a string.
Dir is a built-in function for Python, and it will tell you about the objects that you have. So this is a string object, and it's telling me about that. So if I run it on, let's say we import a module, and we just do dir on the sys module, we'll get something completely different. It'll tell you everything about the sys module. There's a lot of this in the sys module.
Okay.
So yeah, if you want to play around with this, you know, you can. I don't have like Matplotlib installed, but if you did, you could import it here and create a graph. And then when you run your code, it'll actually display the graph as the output instead of just code output.
Right. So what's the idea between the different cells? So like in that second cell, am I correct that you have 2 cells here?
Yes, we have 2 cells now.
If you do something like, v = 10 in the first cell, could you then say print v or b in the second cell?
Yes, if you run them in this. Oh, sorry. Let me back up. So let's go up here. Oops. I don't know why it's selecting everything. I think what we want to do. Restart the kernel. And so you restart the kernel if something bad happened, like your Jupyter notebook is acting weird, so you restart it. And I don't think it did what I wanted it to do. But anyway, all right. So since this one's run, it has a little number up here. It has a 4.
Mm-hmm.
That one is run. So that means that any following cell has access to the previous cell's memory. So if I run this, oh, it didn't. So
That
normally
4
it
might have
will.
been from the previous times that we ran that cell.
Yes. All right, so let's try that again.
Okay.
Run that one, and then run this one, and that'll print it.
Got it.
But if you do it out of order, you'll get that error. It's like, what happened? Because it doesn't have it in memory yet.
So I guess that gets to my question is what's kind of like the variable scope? So a cell lower down the page has access to the variables in previous cells as long as the previous cells were run before it.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. So I haven't done this in a while, but let's just try this out. So let's say we create a name. Let's call it Mike. I think if you hit dot and then wait a little bit, it doesn't pop up.
Code completion.
Remember, oh yeah, there it is. And you have to do dot and then tab, and then it'll pop up and let you go through it. Notice there's a really big delay there. You won't see that with PyCharm or VS Code.
Right.
So, it's not an ideal programming environment, but it works pretty well for just, learning from. Okay, so for me, the big power for me is using Markdown. So I can say, let's learn about strings here. Then when I hit enter, it'll format it for me. So like this is a header, heading 1, heading 2. The more of these you put in, the smaller it will get. It converts it. It kind of gives you an idea of what it's going to do.
Uh-huh.
I think it follows the GitHub Markdown language pretty closely. Okay. So you don't have to worry about it being too different from that. You can create lists using star. So list item 1, 2, and then I'll convert it into list items. This text is italicized. I can spell. Italicized. Yeah, close enough. Say italics. It's easier.
There we go.
Or bold. I believe you can also use underscores. I'm so used to using, yeah. So double underscore is bold, single underscore will work for italics.
Got it.
Anyway, because you can do that, you can do some pretty complicated, some pretty nice, you can insert images, you can format the text, you can even use Markdown to insert Python code. You can't run it, but like this is Python code. And you just do triple quotes and say it's Python, print string, and then end it with 3 more backticks. And then when you do that, it'll convert it and give it syntax highlighting, but you can't run it.
Right.
So if you want to run your code, keep it in the code cell. If you just want to talk about your code, you can put it in your Markdown. However, if you want, you can change this to XML or PHP or whatever other languages are available, and then you can talk about those, and you just can't run them unless you have that kernel installed. But that does get you around that. So if you want to show this is what it looks like in C++ versus Python, you can still show that,
Right.
but it has to work down. And interestingly, I've seen some extensions for Jupyter Notebooks, so you can install 2 different languages and then switch between them from cell to cell.
Such as Python and C++, or like Python 2 and Python 3?
I don't think it was C++, but I think it was like Python and Ruby. I think I saw someone switching between the 2.
Nice.
I think you have to use some of Jupyter's magic commands, which I'm not going to go into here because they're kind of complicated and they're kind of weird too. But you can go look those up. They let you do funny things to the cells that are not obvious and not available in any of these menus.
Okay.
So I'm not going to focus on those.
Sure.
Anyway, so let's go through these menus quick. Let's you create a notebook here. Instead of going back to your other tab, you can just create notebooks from the notebook page. I think the coolest thing here is that you can save and checkpoint in the file menu. So you can kind of save out checkpoints of your notebook and say, I want to revert back to something that works. It's not quite version control, but it's kind of like that.
Yeah, and this could work very well. I'm thinking for, let's say that you want to show various different options or different, for instance, when we're teaching, we could show how to, 3 different implementations, and each one of those implementations could be a different checkpoint or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be a good way to use it. Save as, no, that's not what I was looking for. I may not have it installed, but, oh, here it is, download as. Download as lets you convert your notebook into other formats. So this will automatically convert your notebook to HTML, LaTeX, Markdown, PDF if you have LaTeX installed, and reveal JS slides. So if you want to create a slideshow HTML set, you can do it that way.
So if we did a HTML file there, would it just open it up as a, is it still possible to run the code? No, right?
No, because it's just going to be basically embedded in the HTML. It'll still look like a notebook, but you can't run it.
Right.
Jupyter Notebook is using, I think it's the Tornado library underneath to run as its server. So without that, there's none of the magic is possible. All right. The edit menu kind of covers the same things that are listed here in the toolbar. So that you edit cells, copy and paste cells, which is kind of nice. So let's say we want to take this cell and copy it. Then we can paste it a couple of times. If you have a complex cell, this might be useful for you. If you get them out of order, you can click on one of them and use the up-down arrows to move it down or up.
Sometimes I've seen at the bottom, like if you take your mouse off the bottom of the kind of white box, there's a little plus button that pops up, down a little lower, just a little bit lower. Like if you take your mouse just a little bit lower, maybe in the center. Have you ever seen that where the little plus button pops up right there to create a new cell?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah. Maybe that's just in. I was just getting a great demo the other day on Databricks, and they basically have like a Jupyter Notebook like environment in their application, and that's probably what it was.
Yeah, Microsoft has Azure Notebooks, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've added stuff like Microsoft is in that. Google has the Collaboratory, I believe, what they call their version of the notebook. So yeah, there's probably some add-ons. I wouldn't be surprised if you can probably install an add-on that does that. There's a pretty big add-on extension library for Jupyter Notebook.
Cool.
Okay, what else was I going to talk about? Copy, paste. Those are really handy. All right, next. Oh yes, you can view the headers. Or, yeah, that's not the right header I was thinking of. Okay, so toolbar. If you have the slideshow, that appears when you install Rise. So that lets me say that these are slides or sub-slides. And what that allows me to do is that if I click this button for the Rise slideshow, it'll make that first one into a slide, and then you can click the buttons to go continue, or you can hit the space bar, and it'll just kind of go through your slides nicely. And then of course you can live code here as much as you want.
Oh, cool.
I like that.
Yeah, that is nice.
But that's what I use it for when I'm presenting code at a conference or a small group. And you can insert a cell above or below. The cool thing about the cells, so if you have a lot of output in your code, you know, if you have like 100 cells, going through each cell and saying clear the cell is time consuming. So you can go down and just clear all the output. Or you can clear just cell by cell. You can convert a cell from one type to another type within this menu. I personally prefer the toolbar for that, but if you like menus, I guess that's for you. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of different ways to run the cells. You can run all the cells. You can run the cells that are above your current selection or below your current selection. Run all the cells.
And that might be the run above seems handy too if you're, you know, with that little bug that we had in the beginning there when you tried to run print B, right? If you would run cells above first, you know, and you could have 10, 15 cells up there just to make sure they're all in memory before you run the next one.
Yes, that's a good idea for that. Kernel, this is where stuff gets out of sync. So a few months ago, I was doing a presentation on Python's logging module. And normally when you run the logging module, it goes in only one script at a time. But because the cells all share their memory, I couldn't run multiple scripts because I kept writing to the same logger every time instead of to separate loggers. So one way to get the Jupyter Notebook to work correctly is to restart the kernel between cell runs, which is kind of annoying. So I ended up not using Jupyter for that. But most of the time, you don't have to mess with restarting the kernel unless something goofy like that happens where you just can't get rid of the memory and you need to get rid of the memory from the previous cells. Mm-hmm. You go and you just
like a force, the kernel. It's like a force quit, like a force restart.
Yes. The reconnect and shutdown, I think that more refers to turning off your notebook. You don't really need to do that most of the time. In fact, I don't think I've ever had to do that. I've only had to restart. Okay. So. You can actually do widgets in notebooks. I don't have a good example handy, but it lets you create buttons using kind of a JavaScript / HTML type syntax.
Okay.
So you put buttons and forms and whatnot on there.
If I'm curious about looking, you said there's a bunch of add-ons and stuff like that for Jupyter Notebooks. Where would I find those and how might I install one?
Okay, so let's go look up extension quick. The most popular one, fortunately, is the first link here, Jupyter Contrib NB extensions. To install it is usually just a pip install, which is really handy. There are some extensions that were not created quite right, so you can't just pip install them. You have to go through a Jupyter install. I don't think this has that. Oh yeah, here we go. Some of them you have to do this stuff where you tell Jupyter Contrib NB extension install. Most of them you don't have to do that, but there are some that are just, they're not made pip compatible, and then you have to go jump through some extra hoops. Mm-hmm. Once they're installed and activated, then you know the interface will change. It usually change a little bit. There'll be new buttons here or new menu options.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll add you'll have to know a certain URL to go to. So you might go to NB Contrib instead of /notebooks, and then you can configure the extension. They're all different, so I can't generalize very well how those would work. Let's see, where's the other thing I wanted to show y'all? Okay, let's go back to new. So you can do a bunch of neat things right here in the browser. So if you want to create a new folder, you can create a folder where you started your notebook, and give it a name or whatever. You can upload files to your notebook. so that the notebook can access, like an XML file that you want to parse interactively or a JSON file.
Mm-hmm.
Upload that. You can actually run a terminal in the notebook, and it lets you run regular commands in the browser.
And this this terminal is inside the Jupy, right?
Yes.
Inside the Jupy directory.
Yep, we're in the Jupy directory, and we're actually running the terminal within my browser as well.
Interesting. Yeah, if you want to make running the terminal as strange and awkward as possible.
Yeah.
But that would, I mean, that could be useful if the Jupyter Notebook, if you're accessing it remotely, right?
Yeah, you could use it for that. I don't know, I've got a bunch of tutorials on my blog about how to do some other more advanced stuff that I don't think is worth covering right now. But anyway,
just if you don't mind, do you mind just opening up your blog real quick so if people are interested, they can go take a look.
Go to blog pythonlibrary.org. Let's go look up Jupyter quick. Yeah, so I have like one on how to add notifications to Jupyter Notebook calls. Yeah, Netflix has a neat Polynote Jupyter Notebook variant I wrote about a while ago.
Yeah, lots.
If you want to get, what's that?
Lots of great stuff in here.
Yeah, there's all kinds of interesting things. I do have that tutorial on notebook widgets. So if you want to learn how to insert widgets into your notebook,
very nice.
You can go play with that. Yeah, I've got a bunch of different things. You can even do animations. I'd forgotten about that. It's been a year or two since I've written this.
I wonder if I can actually. Would you be open to doing a very simple import Matplotlib and plot a very simple chart and show that in the Jupyter Notebook? So I think that's one of the things that's really catchy about Jupyter Notebooks and really useful, and why a lot of people in the whole data science realm use it.
Let's go ahead and install Jupyter Notebook while I go find an example. I mean,
Matplotlib.
Matplotlib, yeah.
I've got a. I'll actually chat it to you right here in the meeting. There's just a very simple little example code block down there, right there.
Okay, let's copy that and we'll go back here. Yeah, you failed because I need to restart you. All right. Restart our notebook. And get rid of these other ones.
And there it is.
You run it and it shows it. It's really cool how it works. I really like that feature. Yeah. Then you can just play with the numbers too, like play with it, change it, make it do stuff right there.
Yeah.
Some people run a machine learning tech right there in the Jupyter Notebook, which, I mean, you can't test it. I don't know how helpful that is, but you can see the output, which is really handy.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot, even in a couple of other of these tech talks, really on the data science front, right? When the people are trying to understand a data set, clean a data set, kind of like data munging, where you don't necessarily want to write concrete code that's going to last forever. You're just someone who's trying to understand a new data set and derive some meaning for it. Jupyter Notebooks is a great kind of playground to just do all of these different things. And then once you kind of have this theory, right, that's backed up by data that you've imported and written Python code over to analyze and plotted in these graphs, you can then take that to various other, to your engineering team, to the business, development team, whatever it might be, and help them make better decisions, right? And then you might build kind of like long-standing software that, like pure Python code that gets deployed to some server based off of, these findings.
Yeah.
Very neat. Well, this has been a great little introduction to all things Jupyter Notebook. Are there, what about any kind of gotchas or pitfalls or things to look out for? Are there common mistakes that people make that you see with Jupyter Notebooks, or something that took you a minute to wrap your head around?
Well, yeah, the whole shared memory between cells thing, I think is probably the most common stumbling block. And it's not always obvious what you did wrong, especially if you have a long a lot of cells, and you're like, well, I just want to test this one cell, and it doesn't work, and I don't know why it doesn't work. Well, you got to go back and run the other cells. So
is there a reason why somebody would do, let's say, 10 small cells versus one large cell, or is there any kind of upside downside to that?
it's more for just splitting up the information. Like for me, I split it up because I'm going to present, so I only want so much on my screen at once.
Uh-huh.
So like this is probably just about perfect for an example, because I can run it and I can see my graph. If I ran a long block of code of like 100 lines, I wouldn't be able to show my entire slide, so
Right.
it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
But
And
I think go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say one complete side note here with this graph that we've plotted. There's all different types of charts that you could very, very quickly do. Line charts, bar charts, scatter graphs, all kinds of different stuff, and you can customize them. There's all kinds of charting libraries that you can pull in to make them really fancy and colorful and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that we just did that, this is the tip of the iceberg of just in the terms of plotting graphs, for instance, that you see right here.
Yeah, I think if you want to make it look really pretty, I think a lot of people like Seaborn or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, I've seen that one used a lot.
So.
Well, nice. Any other, maybe after being quite comfortable with Jupyter Notebooks, is there any tips, like productivity tips, or like you mentioned before, a quick way to run a cell is just to say, what was it, Shift Enter if your cursor is active in it?
Oh yes. I learned the keyboard shortcuts, which you can access from help.
Perfect.
Go in there and learn them, because they are very handy, especially if you like to present your code. Then you can do a lot of keyboard shortcuts within the presentation version of the software.
Very nice. Yeah, perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. Great. Well, any other things that you wanted to share with us today, Mike?
Oh, no, I think that's about it.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for touring us around Jupyter Notebooks. I'm sure this is very useful for many people who are just kind of getting started with Python programming as well as data science. And again, to have someone with your experience and with all the content that you create and the books that you've written to be able to share this with us is very nice. And so, as I mentioned before, anybody who's interested to learn more can check out Mike's blog, which is blog.pythonlibrary.org, as well as a variety of books that he's published. All of them are available, for instance, on Amazon if you search Mike Driscoll. And I'll link those down in the description of this video below. So thank you again, Mike. I really appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking and subscribing. If there's another topic that you'd like to learn more about, leave us a comment. We would love to hear from you. And if you want to become a coding pro, visit our website at codingnomads.co. See you next time.